It was just another ordinary day at the courthouse. People milled about, some nervously clutching papers, others whispering to their lawyers or family members. Among them stood a man who had no idea his life was about to take an unexpected turn. Let's call him the Guy for now. He wasn't anyone famous, just someone trying to get through life like everyone else. He worked hard, took care of his responsibilities, and did what he could to make ends meet. The Guy had come to court over something small, a parking ticket he thought he'd already paid months ago. It wasn't a big deal in the grand scheme of things, but it was important enough to bring him here today. He wore a simple shirt, tucked neatly into his pants, hoping that if he looked presentable, maybe the judge would see him as someone responsible, not someone trying to game the system. When his name was called, he walked up to the front of the room. His heart was beating fast, but he kept his cool. This wasn't his first time in court. He'd been there before for minor stuff. But this judge felt different. There was something in the air, a kind of tension you couldn't quite put your finger on. As soon as the Guy started explaining his side of the story, the judge cut him off. Not politely, not professionally, just sharp and rude. "You people never learn," the judge said, leaning forward with a sneer. The words hit like a punch to the gut. Everyone in the room froze, unsure of what they'd just heard. Was this really happening? The Guy didn't react right away. He stood there, stunned, trying to process what had just happened. Had the judge really said that? Out loud? In front of everyone? He glanced around the room looking for some sign that someone else had caught it too. Some jurors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few even exchanged glances. But mostly, silence filled the space thick and heavy. Instead of lashing out or losing his temper, the Guy stayed calm. He knew better than to give the judge more ammunition. If he got angry, it would only confirm whatever stereotypes the judge already believed. So he swallowed his pride, nodded respectfully, and tried again to explain the situation. But the judge wasn't interested in listening. Every time the Guy opened his mouth, the judge interrupted with another insult. Always making excuses, the judge muttered under his breath, loud enough for everyone to hear. Then came comments about how people like you were always causing trouble. Each word stung more than the last, but the Guy refused to let it show. Instead, he focused on keeping his voice steady and his tone polite. What made it worse was knowing that none of this had anything to do with the actual case. The Guy hadn't done anything wrong. He genuinely believed he'd settled the matter months ago. Yet here he was, being treated like a criminal because of the color of his skin. It wasn't fair, but fairness rarely seemed to play a role in situations like these. Toward the end of the hearing, the judge handed down a ruling that felt completely unjust. The fine was higher than expected, and the reasoning behind it didn't add up. As the Guy stepped back from the podium, he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was going on here. Something darker. Little did he know. Someone in the courtroom had noticed everything. One of the jurors, sitting quietly among the rest, had decided to record the exchange on their phone. They weren't sure why they did it. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was frustration, but once the hearing ended, they uploaded the video online. Within hours, it spread like wildfire. That night, as the Guy sat at home scrolling through social media, he saw the clip. At first, he didn't believe it. How had this private moment become public so quickly? And yet, deep down, part of him felt relieved. Maybe now, people would understand what he'd gone through. Maybe now, someone would listen. But the whirlwind was only beginning. What started as a routine hearing had turned into something far bigger than anyone could have imagined. The Guy didn't realize it yet, but his life, and the lives of many others, was about to change forever. The video of the courtroom exchange didn't just sit quietly online, it exploded. Within hours, it felt like the entire world had seen it. Social media platforms were flooded with reactions, comments, and shares. People couldn't stop talking about what they'd witnessed. The clip wasn't long, just a few minutes, but it packed a punch that left viewers stunned. At first, the Guy in the video didn't fully grasp how big this was becoming. He went about his evening as usual, scrolling through his phone while his daughter played nearby. Then notifications started pouring in. Friends, family members, and even strangers were tagging him in posts, sharing their outrage and offering support. Some people sent messages saying they'd been through similar experiences but never had the courage to speak up. Others thanked him for staying calm under pressure when most would have lost their cool. By morning, the story had made its way onto news websites and TV channels. Reporters scrambled to piece together details, interviewing legal experts, community leaders, and anyone who might shed light on the situation. The judge's words echoed across headlines, sparking debates about bias, fairness, and accountability in the justice system. Protesters began gathering outside the courthouse holding signs that read, "Justice for all," "Enough is enough," and "Bias has no place here." For the guy, all this attention was overwhelming. One moment, he was just a regular person trying to deal with a parking ticket. The next, he was at the center of a national conversation. Cameras followed him wherever he went. Journalists camped outside his house, hoping for an interview. Phone calls came non-stop, from reporters, supporters, and even politicians eager to align themselves with his cause. Despite the chaos, he tried to stay grounded. His priority was still his daughter. She didn't understand why so many people were suddenly interested in her dad, or why cameras kept flashing whenever they stepped outside. To protect her, he limited interviews and avoided discussing anything too personal. But he also knew he couldn't ignore what was happening. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about standing up for everyone who'd ever felt powerless in a courtroom. As the days passed, something remarkable began to happen. Strangers from all over the country rallied around him. A crowdfunding campaign was launched to help cover his legal fees and provide financial support for his family. Donations poured in faster than anyone expected, far exceeding the initial goal. People weren't just giving money, they were sending letters, artwork, and heartfelt messages of encouragement. Some even offered to volunteer their time or expertise to help fight the case. Amidst the outpouring of support, the guy found himself reflecting on the bigger picture. He realized this wasn't just about one bad judge or one unfair ruling. It was about exposing flaws in a system that had let countless others down. For years, people had whispered about corruption and bias in the courts, but nothing ever seemed to change. Now, thanks to that leaked video, there was proof. And with proof came hope. But behind the scenes, things were heating up in ways no one could have predicted. While the public focused on the judge's racist remarks, investigators were digging deeper into his past. Whispers of corruption had circulated for years. Rumors that he accepted bribes, manipulated cases, and favored wealthy defendants. Until now, those whispers had remained unproven. But the viral video had reignited interest in his conduct, prompting law enforcement agencies to take another look. One key figure in this investigation was a juror from the hearing, the same person who had secretly recorded the exchange. Their decision to capture the moment hadn't been random. They'd noticed patterns in the judge's behavior during previous trials and suspected something was off. When the opportunity arose, they acted, on instinct, knowing the footage might be crucial evidence someday. Little did they know, it would become the spark that ignited a much larger fire. As investigators gathered more information, they uncovered a trail of suspicious activity stretching back years. Financial records showed large sums of money deposited into accounts linked to the judge. Text messages revealed conversations with influential figures, hinting at deals struck behind closed doors. Emails hinted at connections to organized crime networks. Piece by piece, a disturbing puzzle began to emerge. Back in the spotlight, the guy continued to navigate the whirlwind surrounding him. Supporters urged him to file a formal complaint against the judge, while others encouraged him to pursue legal action for defamation and discrimination. Lawyers reached out offering pro bono services to help him fight back. But he took his time making decisions, wanting to ensure every step he took aligned with his values and goals. Through it all, he remained humble. Despite the fame and attention, he insisted he wasn't a hero. He was just someone who'd stood firm when pushed too far. He reminded everyone that real change wouldn't come from one viral video or one high-profile case. It would require sustained effort, unity, and a commitment to holding institutions accountable. And then, just when it seemed like the storm might settle, something happened that shocked everyone, including the guy himself. Law enforcement officials announced they were preparing to make a move. The FBI was involved now, and their target was clear. What unfolded next would leave the nation watching and wondering if justice could truly prevail. The guy at the center of the storm didn't know it yet, but the FBI was quietly working behind the scenes. While he was dealing with interviews, protests, and messages from supporters, investigators were piecing together a case that went far beyond one racist outburst in court. It wasn't just about what the judge had said. It was about what he'd been doing for years. And the deeper they dug, the uglier things got. For law enforcement, this wasn't a new story. Whispers about the judge's misconduct had been floating around for a long time. Former clerks, lawyers, and even other judges had hinted at shady dealings, things like accepting bribes, favoring certain defendants, and manipulating cases to serve his own interests. But proving any of it had always been the challenge. Judges are supposed to be pillars of integrity, people who uphold the law. So when accusations surfaced, they were often dismissed as sour grapes or baseless rumors. But this time, something was different. That leaked video didn't just expose the judge's prejudice. It opened the floodgates. People started coming forward with stories they'd kept hidden for years. One former clerk talked about how the judge would disappear into private meetings with wealthy clients, only to return with strange smiles and vague explanations. A lawyer confessed to feeling pressured into paying fees to ensure favorable rulings for her clients. Another source revealed how small-time offenders often received harsh sentences, while big shots walked away scot-free. Each testimony added another layer to the investigation. Agents combed through bank records looking for patterns of suspicious deposits. They analyzed phone logs, tracing calls between the judge and individuals tied to organized crime. Emails and text messages provided glimpses into secret negotiations, quid pro quo arrangements and promises made under the table. Slowly but surely, a web of corruption began to take shape. A web that implicated not only the judge but also several powerful figures connected to him. What shocked investigators most was the scale of it all. This wasn't some isolated incident of greed or bias. It was a systematic abuse of power, a betrayal of trust that had festered unchecked for years. The judge had turned the courtroom into his personal playground, bending laws and lives to suit his agenda. And because of his position, no one dared to challenge him, until now. Meanwhile, the guy found himself caught between two worlds. On one hand, he was grateful for the support pouring in from strangers across the country. People saw him as a symbol of resilience, someone who hadn't backed down despite being treated unfairly. They praised his calm demeanor during the hearing, calling him an inspiration. Fundraisers continued to grow, providing not only financial relief but also a sense of solidarity he'd never expected. On the other hand, the pressure was mounting. Lawyers urged him to cooperate with investigators, sharing every detail he could remember about the hearing and the judge's behavior. Reporters hounded him for updates, desperate for exclusive interviews. Supporters debated online about whether he should sue the judge for discrimination or demand an immediate resignation. Everyone wanted him to do something bold, something dramatic. But he hesitated, not because he lacked courage, but because he wanted to think carefully before taking any steps that might hurt his family or compromise his values. He spent hours talking to trusted friends and advisors, weighing his options. Should he file a formal complaint? Sue the judge? Speak publicly about systemic issues in the justice system? Each choice came with risks and rewards, and he knew whatever he decided would have ripple effects far beyond his own life. He didn't want to act impulsively. This wasn't just about seeking revenge or vindication. It was about creating lasting change. As the investigation gained momentum, leaks started trickling out to the media. News outlets reported on the FBI's findings, painting a picture of widespread corruption that left the public reeling. Headlines screamed about bribes, rigged trials, and connections to criminal networks. Protesters outside the courthouse grew more vocal, chanting slogans like "Clean up the courts" and "No more corruption." Lawmakers issued statements, condemning the judge's actions and promising reforms. For the first time in years, it felt like real accountability might be within reach. Still, the guy couldn't shake the feeling that this was bigger than one man. Yes, the judge needed to answer for his crimes, but what about the system that allowed him to operate unchecked for so long? What about the countless others who had suffered silently because they didn't have the resources or platform to fight back? He realized that true justice wouldn't come from punishing one bad actor. It would require tearing down the structures that enabled such behavior in the first place. One evening, as he sat alone in his living room, scrolling through news, articles, and social media posts, he thought about the future. If everything went well, if the judge was held accountable and reforms were implemented, what kind of world would his daughter inherit? Would she grow up in a society where fairness and equality were the norm, not the exception? Or would she face the same struggles he had? That question weighed heavily on him. It reminded him why he had to stay involved, why he couldn't simply step back and let others handle the situation. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about building a better future for everyone. And if that meant enduring sleepless nights, tough decisions, and constant scrutiny, then so be it. Unbeknownst to him, the FBI was preparing its next move. Agents had gathered enough evidence to secure a warrant, and they were planning to execute it soon. Timing was crucial. They wanted to send a clear message that no one, not even a judge, was above the law. When the moment came, it would happen, in front of witnesses, ensuring maximum impact. For now, though, the guy remained unaware of what was coming. He focused on staying strong, staying grounded, and keeping his family safe. Little did he know the climax of this saga was just around the corner, and it would leave everyone speechless. The day started like any other for the guy. He woke up early, made breakfast for his daughter, and tried to focus on keeping things normal despite everything happening around him. Outside, reporters still lingered near their home, hoping to catch a glimpse of him or snag an interview. Inside, he did his best to ignore the chaos and keep life as routine as possible, for her sake. But deep down, he knew today wasn't going to be ordinary. Something felt different in the air, though he couldn't quite put his finger on it. When he arrived at the courthouse later that morning, the energy was electric. Supporters lined the streets, holding signs and chanting slogans. Cameras flashed as he walked past, capturing every step. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with tension. People packed the benches. Activists, journalists, curious onlookers, all waiting to see what would happen next. Even the bailiff seemed unusually alert, glancing toward the door more often than usual. The judge entered moments later, walking in with the same air of authority he always carried. If he felt nervous about the mounting pressure outside, or the ongoing FBI investigation, he didn't show it. He took his seat, adjusted his robe, and called the court to order. His voice boomed through the room, commanding attention as if nothing had changed. To anyone watching, it looked like just another day on the bench. But then something unexpected happened. Midway through the proceedings, while the guy stood quietly at the podium listening to yet another lecture from the judge, the doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. Everyone turned to look, startled by the sudden interruption. 2 FBI agents strode in, their badges gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The room fell silent, so quiet you could hear a pin drop. For a moment, no one moved. The judge paused mid-sentence, his face frozen in confusion. Then one of the agents stepped forward, addressing the judge directly. "Your Honor," the agent said firmly, "you are under arrest." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Murmurs broke out as people leaned toward each other, whispering in disbelief. The judge sputtered, his composure cracking for the first time. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice rising. "This is outrageous. I'm a sitting judge." But the agents weren't swayed. They approached the bench calmly, handcuffs ready. One of them began reading him his rights. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As the cuffs clicked into place, the reality of the situation hit the judge hard. His face flushed red and he struggled to argue, insisting this was all some kind of misunderstanding. But his protests fell flat. The agents led him away, past rows of stunned spectators who watched in stunned silence. For many, it was surreal, a scene straight out of a movie, except this was real life. The guy stood there, frozen at the podium, unsure of how to react. He hadn't seen this coming. Sure, he'd heard rumors about the FBI investigating the judge, but he never imagined they'd make a move like this, in the middle of a hearing, in front of everyone. It was bold, dramatic, and completely unprecedented. As the judge disappeared, through the doors leaving behind only the echo of his angry protests, the guy finally exhaled. He felt a mix of emotions: relief, disbelief, even a strange sense of vindication. But mostly he felt numb. The courtroom erupted into chaos once the judge was gone. Reporters scrambled to get quotes from anyone willing to talk. Lawyers whispered, furiously among themselves, speculating about what charges might be filed. Protesters outside cheered when news of the arrest spread, celebrating what felt like a monumental victory. Social media lit up again, with hashtags like "Justice Served" trending within minutes. For the guy, the rest of the day passed in a blur. After the hearing ended abruptly, he found himself surrounded by supporters eager to shake his hand or offer words of encouragement. Some thanked him for standing strong, others told him he'd inspired them to speak out against injustice in their own lives. Cameras followed him everywhere, capturing his every move. Yet despite the whirlwind, he stayed humble, deflecting praise and reminding people that this wasn't about him, it was about accountability. That evening, as he sat at home reflecting on the day's events, he felt a mix of exhaustion and awe. What had happened in that courtroom was historic, a powerful figure being held accountable in such a public way. It sent a message loud and clear: no one is above the law, not even a judge. But it also raised questions about what came next. Would this lead to real change? Or would the system find ways to protect itself, sweeping the problem under the rug once again? He thought about the judge's expression as he was led away. The shock, the anger, the humiliation. It wasn't something he took joy in seeing. In fact, part of him felt sorry for the man. No matter how wrong the judge had been, no one deserved to fall so far. Still, justice needed to be served. Not just for him, but for everyone who had ever been mistreated or silenced by someone in power. As the days passed, details about the arrest began to emerge. News outlets reported that the FBI had uncovered evidence of widespread corruption, including bribes, rigged trials, and ties to organized crime. The judge wasn't acting alone. Several high-profile figures were implicated in the scandal, leading to a wave of arrests and resignations. Lawmakers promised sweeping reforms to prevent anything like this from happening again. Activists seized the moment, pushing harder than ever for transparency and accountability in the justice system. Through it all, the guy remained cautious. While the arrest marked a turning point, he knew the fight wasn't over. Holding one bad actor accountable was important, but dismantling the systems that allowed such behavior to thrive was the real challenge. He vowed to stay involved, using his platform to advocate for meaningful change. Whether it meant speaking at rallies, meeting with lawmakers, or simply sharing his story, he was determined to keep pushing forward. Looking back, he realized how much his life had changed since that fateful day in court. From a routine parking ticket hearing to becoming the face of a national movement, his journey had been anything but predictable. And while he couldn't control what happened next, he knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't let fear or doubt stop him from doing what he believed was right. Because sometimes standing up, even when it feels impossible, is the only way to create a better future. The arrest of the judge didn't just make headlines, it sparked a movement. People across the country were inspired by what had happened in that courtroom. For years they'd felt powerless against injustice, like their voices didn't matter. But now here was proof that even someone as powerful as a sitting judge could be held accountable. It gave them hope. A glimmer of belief that change was possible if enough people stood together. The guy at the center of it all found himself thrust into a role he never imagined for himself. He wasn't an activist or a politician. He was just a regular person who had been pushed too far. Yet here he was being asked to speak at rallies, meet with lawmakers, and partner with advocacy groups working to reform the justice system. At first he hesitated. This kind of attention wasn't something he sought, and he worried about saying the wrong thing or letting people down. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized he couldn't step back. This wasn't just his story anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt silenced or mistreated. He started small, attending local events where he shared his experience and listened to others. He met people from all walks of life, single mothers fighting for custody rights, young men wrongly accused of crimes, elderly folks struggling to navigate complex legal systems. Each story reinforced why this fight mattered so much. These weren't abstract issues. They were real lives being affected every single day. And each time he spoke, he reminded himself that the goal wasn't revenge or retribution. It was fairness. It was making sure no one else had to go through what he and countless others had endured. As word spread about his efforts, invitations poured in. Advocacy organizations wanted him to join campaigns aimed at increasing transparency in courts. Lawmakers approached him for input on proposed legislation designed to root out corruption and bias within the judicial system. Even schools invited him to speak to students, encouraging them to stand up for what's right and believe in their ability to create change. Despite the growing demands on his time, he stayed grounded. His priority remained his daughter. She was still too young to fully understand what was happening, but she noticed the changes. The cameras outside their house, the strangers asking for autographs, the late-night phone calls. To protect her, he set boundaries. No interviews during family time. No public appearances without careful consideration of how they might affect her. He knew this moment would pass eventually, and when it did, he wanted her to remember him not as a public figure, but as a dad who loved her deeply. One of the biggest challenges he faced was balancing anger with optimism. It would have been easy to let bitterness consume him, to focus on the pain and frustration of everything he'd gone through. But he chose a different path. Instead of dwelling on the past, he looked toward the future. He focused on solutions, not blame. When speaking publicly, he emphasized the importance of forgiveness, not because the judge deserved it, but because holding on to hatred only weighed you down. "We can't change what happened," he often said, "but we can decide how we move forward." His message resonated with people. They saw in him not just a victim of injustice, but a symbol of resilience. Here was someone who had faced cruelty head-on and refused to let it break him. That kind of strength was contagious, inspiring others to speak up and take action in their own communities. From grassroots movements to national campaigns, momentum built around the idea of creating a fairer, more equitable justice system. Meanwhile, the fallout from the judge's arrest continued to unfold. Investigators uncovered even more evidence of corruption, implicating not only the judge, but also several other high-profile figures. Some resigned under pressure. Others fought back, claiming innocence or blaming the system itself. Either way, trust in institutions plummeted. People demanded answers and reforms. Lawmakers responded by introducing sweeping legislation aimed at addressing systemic issues. Bills were drafted to increase oversight of judges, require regular ethics training, and establish independent bodies to investigate complaints of misconduct. Transparency became a buzzword, with calls for court proceedings to be recorded and made publicly accessible. While some critics argued these measures wouldn't go far enough, most agreed they were a step in the right direction. For the guy, seeing these changes unfold was bittersweet. On one hand, he felt proud of what had been accomplished. The arrest of the judge had opened doors that had long been shut, forcing society to confront uncomfortable truths about bias and inequality. On the other hand, he knew there was still so much work to be done. Laws could be written, policies could be changed, but true progress required shifting mindsets. It meant teaching people to see beyond stereotypes and treat each other with dignity and respect. To help drive that cultural shift, he partnered with educators and community leaders to launch programs focused on empathy and understanding. Workshops were held in schools, churches, and community centers, bringing people together to talk openly about race, privilege, and justice. Role-playing exercises helped participants step into someone else's shoes, fostering compassion and breaking down barriers. These conversations weren't always easy. Sometimes tensions flared and disagreements arose, but they were necessary. Change rarely came without discomfort. As months passed, the initial frenzy surrounding the case began to fade. Reporters stopped calling as frequently, and protesters outside the courthouse dwindled to a handful. Life slowly returned to normal, or at least as close to normal as it could get after such a whirlwind. The guy appreciated the quiet, using the time to reflect on everything that had happened and plan for what lay ahead. Through it all, he held on to one core belief: that people were inherently good. Yes, there were bad actors, those who abused power or acted out of prejudice, but they were the exception, not the rule. Most people genuinely wanted to do the right thing. They just needed guidance and opportunities to grow. That philosophy guided everything he did, from his advocacy work to his interactions with strangers. He believed in humanity's capacity for change, and he worked tirelessly to nurture it. By the end of the year, he had become a household name, a symbol of courage and perseverance. Awards and honors came his way, but he accepted them humbly, always redirecting praise to the countless others fighting alongside him. He knew none of this would have been possible without the support of friends, family, and strangers who believed in the cause. Together, they had proven that collective action could topple even the tallest walls. But as much as things had changed, some constants remained. The guy still woke up early each morning, made breakfast for his daughter, and sent her off to school with a hug and a smile. He still carried the lessons he'd learned throughout this journey: the importance of staying calm under pressure, of choosing kindness over anger, of believing in the possibility of redemption. And he still dreamed of a world where stories like his wouldn't need to exist, a world where fairness and equality were the norm, not the exception. Little did he know, his next chapter was about to begin. A new judge had been appointed to fill the vacancy left behind, an appointment that carried immense symbolism and promise. As he prepared to witness history once again, he couldn't help but feel hopeful. Maybe, just maybe, the tide was finally turning. Months had passed since the whirlwind of events that changed everything. The guy who once stood nervously in a courtroom, hoping to resolve a minor parking ticket, now found himself stepping into another courthouse. But this time, it was different. This time, he wasn't there as a defendant or a victim. He was there as a witness to history. The room buzzed with anticipation. Supporters filled the benches, their faces glowing with hope and excitement. Reporters lined the walls, cameras ready to capture every moment. It wasn't just any hearing. This was the first official session presided over by the newly appointed judge. She was the first African-American woman to hold this position in decades, and her presence symbolized more than just progress. It represented resilience, justice, and the possibility of redemption for a system long marred by bias and corruption. As the clerk called the court to order, the new judge walked in, her robe flowing behind her. Her demeanor commanded respect, not through intimidation but through quiet confidence. There was no arrogance in her expression, only determination. When she took her seat at the bench and addressed the room, her voice carried warmth along with authority. "This is a fresh start," she said, looking around at the packed courtroom. "We are here not just to administer justice, but to rebuild trust." For the guy watching her speak felt surreal. He remembered standing in that same spot months earlier, feeling powerless against a figure who had abused his power. Now here was someone who embodied fairness and integrity, a stark contrast to what he'd endured before. As she glanced toward him briefly during the proceedings, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This was the kind of change he had hoped for when he chose to stay strong despite everything. After the formalities concluded, the judge paused and turned directly to him. "Sir," she said warmly, her words echoing through the room, "your courage has paved the way for so many others. Thank you for reminding us what real dignity looks like." The crowd erupted into applause, some rising to their feet. The guy simply nodded, too overwhelmed to respond. All those sleepless nights, all the moments of doubt, they suddenly felt worth it. Outside the courthouse afterward, supporters gathered to celebrate. Cheers rang out as people hugged one another, sharing stories of how far they'd come. For years, they'd fought for reform, often feeling like they were shouting into the void. But now, tangible progress stood before them. The appointment of the new judge wasn't just symbolic, it was proof that persistence pays off. That even when the odds seem insurmountable, collective effort can move mountains. As the celebrations continued, the guy stepped aside for a moment, needing a break from the noise. He leaned against a nearby railing, watching families laugh and children chase each other across the lawn. His own daughter tugged at his sleeve, asking if they could go home soon. Smiling, he picked her up and held her close, grateful for the simplicity of her presence. Amidst all the chaos, she remained his anchor, a reminder of why he kept going. Later that evening, as he sat alone on his porch, he allowed himself to reflect on everything that had happened. From the day he walked into that courtroom to settle a parking ticket to becoming the face of a national movement, his journey had been anything but predictable. Along the way, he'd faced fear, anger, and uncertainty. But he'd also discovered strength he didn't know he had. He'd learned that standing up for yourself isn't just about fighting back. It's about refusing to let negativity define you. It's about choosing grace over bitterness, action over apathy. He thought about the judge, the corrupt one, and wondered where he was now. Rumors swirled about his trial, whispers of deals being made behind closed doors. Some speculated he'd spend years in prison. Others believed he'd find a loophole to escape accountability. Either way, the guy realized it didn't matter as much as it once did. What mattered was the ripple effect his actions had created. One man's downfall had exposed cracks in a broken system, forcing society to confront uncomfortable truths. And while healing those wounds would take time, the process had already begun. Looking ahead, he knew challenges lay in wait. Not everyone supported reform efforts, and resistance to change was inevitable. Some critics argued that appointing diverse judges or implementing stricter oversight wouldn't solve deeper systemic issues. Others claimed the media attention had exaggerated the problem, dismissing calls for accountability as overreactions. But the guy refused to let cynicism cloud his vision. Change rarely came without pushback, and setbacks were part of the journey. What mattered was staying committed to the goal. In the weeks that followed, he focused on building bridges rather than burning them. He reached out to skeptics, inviting them to join conversations about how to improve the justice system. He emphasized collaboration over division, urging people to focus on shared values rather than differences. Progress, he realized, wasn't about winning arguments. It was about finding common ground. His advocacy work expanded beyond courtrooms and legislative halls. He began visiting schools, talking to students about the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it feels scary. He encouraged them to dream big, to imagine a world where fairness and equality weren't exceptions but norms. "You have more power than you think," he told them during one assembly. "Every act of kindness, every refusal to stay silent. That's how we create change." As time went on, life gradually settled into a rhythm. The media spotlight dimmed, allowing him to step back and focus on his family. Yet the lessons he'd learned stayed with him, shaping the way he interacted with the world. He became more patient, more empathetic, and more willing to listen. He understood now that true strength wasn't about dominating others, it was about lifting them up. One evening, as he tucked his daughter into bed, she looked up at him with wide eyes. "Dad?" she asked softly. "Are you famous?" He chuckled, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "No, sweetheart," he replied. "I'm just someone who tried to do the right thing." She smiled, satisfied with his answer, and drifted off to sleep. Standing there in the quiet glow of her nightlight, he felt a deep sense of peace. Fame wasn't important. What mattered was leaving a legacy. Someday, when she was older, he hoped she'd understand the significance of what had happened. He hoped she'd carry forward the values he'd tried to instill in her: kindness, courage, and an unwavering belief in justice. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but he was ready. With every challenge, he reminded himself of the countless faces he'd seen along the way, the activists, the lawmakers, the everyday people who refused to give up. Together, they had proven that change was possible. And as long as there were people willing to fight for fairness, the future held endless potential. Walking back to the living room, he paused by the window, gazing out at the stars. The scars of the past still lingered, but they no longer defined him. Instead, they served as reminders of how far he'd come, and how much farther he could go. For the first time in a long while, he felt hopeful. Not just for himself, but for everyone counting on a better tomorrow. And with that, he turned, off the lights, ready to embrace whatever came next.